I'm very passionate about social enterprise. I've been on a bit of a journey, and my little firm at the southern end of Burke Street was the first law firm in Australasia to be certified a B Corporation, which is an American certification that means that we now have to take into account a wider group of stakeholders, and we're audited on our commitment to doing that twice a year, in fact even more than that sometimes. But what we're here to talk about today is starting a social impact venture, and that's clearly a good thing, right? Especially for this little girl who's about the same age as my daughter, and who's going to inherit the world that we now live in. If we don't do things about our environment and our communities, then the world may not be such a great place for her to live in. So she's very happy that you're here and wanting to talk about this. Very simple binary question. For profit, and looking for someone like this guy to invest in your company, in your entity, or not for profit, and helping someone potentially like this who's fallen on hard times. These are the typical, stereotypical, traditional views of the for-profit and not-for-profit argument. Some people might say that the people who work in not-for-profit organisations may very well end up like this because of the salaries they're paid. So that is the question. And I couldn't help but, because of that, throw in a little Shakespearean gag for you all. So what do we do when we're starting a business? How do we choose between these two options? Is it for-profit versus not-for-profit? Well, I, some time ago, came to a part of the Compass Visionary series, and I listened to Tim Costello and his son talk about this very issue. And what Tim said was, I don't like the negativeness that we put in front of not-for-profits. I'd like to call them for-purpose. And that's very true, because the guiding light of a for-profit entity is that it is there to maximise profit for its shareholders. A not-for-profit entity is not there not to make profit. If it doesn't make any money or it can't receive enough donations, it can't fulfil its purpose. So it's not really not-for-profit. That's not its guiding light, but really it is for purpose. Its entire reason for existence is for purpose. So when you're making this decision, then you really need to think about a few things. Are you selling a product to customers for fees or recovering costs? Do you need to take investment in this vehicle in order to expand it? And do you want to sell parts of it to people? Do you want the company to grow in value and to be able to realise that value in the future for you and your founders? Or alternatively, do you want to use volunteers and take donations and give charitable tax relief to people who make donations to you? Those are the sort of questions you need to weigh up when you're thinking about whether you want to be a for-profit or for-purpose company. But the real key in legal terms, the real difference between for-profit and not-for-profit is one of ownership. Very simply, you cannot own, no one can own a not-for-profit vehicle. It's controlled by members, and for that reason, because it can't be owned, much as this individual is branding his property, it can't take investment, so you can't share out the assets of that company to anyone. In a for-profit business, obviously, you're there to maximise value for the people that own the business. And then on winding up that business, you may distribute the assets to them. One of the other key differences between a not-for-profit and for-profit vehicle is responsibility of the people that control it. And this is a real key issue for people who are making the decision in the modern world about whether they'll be a for-profit, not-for-profit entity. Now, it's not that the director's duties are different in a incorporated association or a company limited by guarantee from those of a director of a private company or a public company. The key difference is that those duties are the same, but they are for different purposes. And the key purpose in a for-profit company, as I mentioned before, is to maximise shareholder value. In a for-profit, you don't have any shareholders. There's no ownership, so you can't maximise shareholder value. You have to pursue your purpose. Now, there are a lot of different types of for-profit entities. And here, I think it's an exhaustive list. Someone else in the audience may suggest different types. The top two are unincorporated. The top one being the most simple way to go into business, and that's as an individual, register an ABN, start peddling your trade. And that may be, it's going to be for profit because you're not a charitable entity, but it may be for purpose. You may volunteer your time. You may decide that you're going to give away a proportion of any money that you own. And you may, at the moment, if there are any sole traders in here, you may not know this, but you might be a social enterprise in some way because you donate so much to charity of your time or the money that you make. Partnerships are just like sole traders. There are some very special, funky types of partnerships that you can enter into these days to receive tax benefits, to start investing in early stage startups. Then there's probably the most common type of vehicle for any for-profit business, and we'll come to this, back to this entity, proprietary limited company. It's the simple private company owned by a few shareholders with not very many reporting requirements and really geared up for small business. Then you have public companies, which can be unlisted or listed. Lots of people don't know this. A public company, you have to be a public company to be listed, but you can be an unlisted public company and the difference between a proprietary limited company in Australia and a public company is that the primary difference, I should say, is that you can only have 50 shareholders in a proprietary limited company. Once you go beyond 50, you must be a public company, and that brings with it more regulatory and transparency regulations. Some people will enter into for-profit business using a trust, either a unit trust or a discretionary trust, and I don't propose to go into trust law here, but there are often, for small businesses, family businesses, some tax advantages in entering into business in that way. And finally, there's the Distributing Cooperative, which is, in very simple terms, under a slightly different piece of legislation, you can join together and run an organisation in a very democratic way to look after different types of assets. And then there's not-for-profit, and there's a few options there. An incorporated association, this is under state-based legislation. A company limited by guarantee, which is like a public company, but it doesn't have shareholders. Instead of shareholders, it has members who offer up a guarantee for the limited liability. So that can be called on at a time if the company is wound up and found to be insolvent, and it can be as small as sort of $5 or so per member. Very good for looking after infrastructure, and a very common not-for-profit structure because it's a membership organisation, and if you have a whole lot of members who have an interest in a certain asset or piece of infrastructure, then the money gets reinvested for their benefit, and they may use that asset or piece of infrastructure to make profit, but the key reason for being for the company limited by guarantee is to be the guardian, if you like, of that asset. Then there's a non-distributing cooperative, which is a democratic but not-for-profit form of a cooperative. And finally, you may also use trusts to be a not-for-profit, and a charitable trust would have a board of volunteers who look after an asset pool to distribute for a purpose and may even pay people to do those things for them. So those are options. There's lots of options, but you're either for-profit or you're not-for-profit. And that's the question. Is there then another path to being an impact business? Can you be for profit and also for purpose. And where does that road lead you? This man is sometimes considered sort of the father of social enterprise, Muhammad Yunus, king of microfinance, and he has something to say about social enterprise. He says that social enterprise is cause-driven business, and in a social businesses, the investors and owners can recoup the money invested, but cannot take any dividend beyond that point. The purpose of investment is likely to achieve one or more social objectives, and through the operation of the company, no personal gain is desired by the investors. So that's one version of a social enterprise definition. And he is a very successful social entrepreneur. And one of the aspects, I think, of microfinance that's unique in the social enterprise framework is that it is about investing and empowering people to form their own businesses. So the impact goes beyond the investment in lots of ways. And we'll touch on some businesses, some Australian businesses who are fitting within that definition of social enterprise that Mr. Yunus would put forward, but they are probably going beyond that in that they are making that they would make distributions to investors if they had made any profit. Another definition of social enterprise is put forward by the British Council, and they've got a very interesting short video on their website that I'd like to share with you. They say that a social enterprise has to have a clear social purpose, and that they generate a significant proportion of their income from trading, but can also rely on donations. That they reinvest the majority, not all, of their profits in their social mission and can distribute some of that to their investors. So they have a slightly wider definition than Mr. Yunus, but as you'll see, he has obviously been involved in forming that because he appears in this video.
Around the world, organisations are doing business differently. Millions of people are facing unprecedented levels of economic uncertainty, and organisations are increasingly understanding the need to develop solutions to environmental and social problems. We need to think differently about value, and businesses are increasingly looking at trust, partnership and opportunity as core to the way we think about the development of business solutions.
As a consequence of the way that we do business, what we've seen is massive increases in inequality.
Businesses in general recognising that the challenges that we face globally are not adequately addressed within the current way we manage value.
How do we measure success? What do we value in our communities and our economy? What do we think are the important outcomes?
We cannot keep on doing what we have done so far. We have to change.
We have to change it from being a profit-driven model to a model that allows us to build community.
Business has always had an important role in society, but I do believe that role is changing.
And businesses recognise that their long-term success and their long-term survival has to be about being part of the solution, not part of the problem. It gives you hope.
Social enterprises are real businesses that are generating real jobs and contributing to the economy, but their focus is on reinvesting their profits to improve people's lives.
Social enterprise means those enterprises which are with a social cause. So it's not just for profit, not just for business, but which gives a sense of taking care of our social needs like health, childcare, education.
Social enterprise for me is the ability to use business models and business methods to create social value.
It is possible to run a business and still focus on the wider social value and not make that secondary.
I'm a strong believer that business can achieve a double bottom line, which means not financial return, but also an impact on the society.
So it's a different way to look at the role of capital and the role of economy.
So the social enterprise economy is structured for business to create real solutions for the world.
One of the exciting developments that I think we're seeing in the whole social impact space is a real convergence between, on one hand, business and business thinking harder about its social impact, And then also the social impact sector, be that social enterprises or charities or not-profits as they're sometimes called, focusing harder on what business-like approaches are they taking to scale and growing.
The UK is recognised as a leader in the development of the social enterprise movement, and we draw on that expertise to promote the growth of social enterprise around the world. Our programme provides training and mentoring and investment opportunities for social enterprises and works with governments around the world to create the right kind of policy environment. We also work with universities to provide opportunities for collaboration on research and courses, and look to bring a social enterprise approach to international development opportunities.
What they're doing is they're connecting people to all of those people who variously have different bits of a jigsaw puzzle to working out how we scale social enterprise.
We are privileged to be able to bring the trust and knowledge and networks that we have developed around the world to play a connecting role.
That ability for the British Council to support that exchange of information and resources was really important for us in Canada. They figured it out in the UK, and they're willing to share it.
I believe there is a significant shift taking place, and the way that we think about economics is also changing from being completely driven by competition and consumption to embracing collaboration and compassion as much more central to the way that we think about value.
The British Council has the staff and the experience and the knowledge and the partnerships and relationships, most importantly, to really act as a catalyst for the global movement of social enterprise to thrive.
A lot of those ventures, and apologies for the little plug for the British Council there, but that's a good video about social enterprise that I thought I might share with you. A lot of those enterprises that they're talking about could very well be not-for-profit or for-profit. But there is a global movement, as you can see. There's lots of very impressive people from all around the world who are pushing forward, saying that we actually need to rephrase the business conversation. We need to reframe it, and we need to say that business has responsibilities beyond just maximising shareholder value, and they have a part to play in this. Whether you agree with that or not, it seems to be happening, and it seems to be happening in a fairly large scale in Australia. It's building momentum as well. So from the traditional not-for-profit versus profit structures, we are now seeing the rise of some different types of entities. In the UK, for a while, they've now had community interest companies, which have particular characteristics, and it is considered a hybrid between for-profit and not-for-profit, because they can distribute some dividends. Directors' duties change, obviously, when you don't have to maximise shareholder value, and there's an asset lock, so certain assets can't be distributed beyond that, and there's restrictions on how they can deal with those assets. So those assets are stuck on course for the purpose of that particular entity. It can be a not-for-profit entity, or it can be a for-profit entity. So it could be a company limited by guarantee, potentially with no ability to give dividends or distributions, or it can be a limited company that can do that, but there's certain restrictions on what it can do with them. So it works for both, and that's the UK's particular solution at this stage. In the US, we have benefit corporations. So as I said earlier, we were certified a benefit corporation. That is different to being a benefit corporation incorporated in one of the 32 states of the US where you can do so. This is actually an entity just like a limited company. But what it does is it requires the directors, rather than allowing them, it requires the directors to take into account a wider group of stakeholders from the environment, community, society, their employees. So it takes it away from maximising shareholder value to maximising value for a wider group, so you have a more balanced look. Now, there are criticisms of both of those entities, and I don't propose to go deeply into those at this stage. There are different types of corporations in the US too. There are C corporations, which are slightly different animal again, which allow you to put the profit first, but you still can consider other things in very simple terms. And Canada is following suit. In different states of Canada, they have some similarly named entities as the UK, and there may be more. I just did a bit of research today to see where they'd got with that, and that's what I came up with. The key to all of this in the question of for-profit and not-for-profit then is really, if you're starting a business, if you have it in your mind to start one with social impact, is that you want to maximise the impact, I would have thought. That's the key for you. And if making profit allows you to do that, then you might choose a for-profit vehicle. If you want to rely on donations then and as your funding, then potentially you don't need to make profit to do that. So that's the sort of question that you're grappling with. What I'd like to do now is take you through a few examples of Australian organisations to again play on the social impact theme or social enterprise theme. I know there was another speaker at the Compass Visionary Series who objected. I think it's Professor Hartman who thinks social enterprise is not the right term. We should be calling them impact businesses, and we should be talking about large businesses and convincing them to make an impact rather than talking to a lot of small businesses. My frame of reference is I work with lots of small businesses, so that's my knowledge base. There are two businesses, Australian-based businesses, whose overarching purpose, if you like, is to alleviate energy poverty in the third world. I know variously these two companies reasonably well, and the first one, Illumination Solar, is a for-profit social enterprise. Now, the common theme for both of these as social enterprises is that they don't necessarily give away their profits. They are creating products to solve a problem that's a social problem. And the problem is, very simply put, kerosene lamps in the third world and the use of kerosene and the impact that has on the population that has to rely on those. Now, Illumination, like I said, is a for-profit social enterprise, and it has taken investment. And its business model is to distribute its lights, small solar lights and some other products now, to the third world through governments and NGOs, often in disaster relief situations. It has distributed around about 500,000 lights since it started. And as far as Shane Thatcher is concerned, who's the CEO of Illumination, has hardly made a cent. But it's made an impact. Pollinate Energy, very similar product. They sell solar-powered lights in India. Very different model. They are a not-for-profit. They have distributed 15,000 lights, which is not even close to what Illumination Solar has done. However, the way they distribute those lights is by empowering local communities, creating a little bit like a microfinance organisation, employing people who are advocates of these things in the local communities. So their impact goes beyond, although they've only done 15,000 lights, it goes beyond the giving of a light. It also impacts communities in terms of making them more financially literate and doing those sort of things, and is slowly building up. So for me, that's a stark contrast. Both social enterprises that are there to create a product that does social good, so that's why they're categorised in that way. Profit isn't really their main concern, even though Illumination has investors and has a duty to maximise shareholder value. Thankfully, its shareholders are patient. And Pollinate Energy, who does a product as well, but reinvests everything in and does it in a much slower, more considered way in one geography. Illumination Solar's everywhere around the third world, and Pollinate concentrates on India, but is making impact in different ways as well. So both laudable examples, both with different levels of impact, potentially. Then we come to a different type of social enterprise, a social enterprise that gives away money, creates a product that isn't necessarily a socially good product, although some might argue about that, and then gives its profits away. So we've had a previous Masterclass speaker, Simon Griffiths, is involved in 2 of these organisations. The first one, Shebeen, is a bar in central Melbourne that's a not-for-profit bar that gave its profits away. Unfortunately for Shebeen, it's not an easy business running a bar in central Melbourne, and it recently had to stop doing that. It got some bad press for that because there were claims that it was going to give away profits that it made, 100% of its profits, and the media obviously sees on these types of things and said, well, you didn't give any profit away because you never made any. And this is one of the things about social enterprise that you've got to think about in terms of transparency and messaging, I think. We all want to do good, but we need to make sure that everybody's clear about what we're doing. And we need to allow businesses to fail. This is the crossover between for-profit and not-for-profit, right? These people are trying to generate an income. So for Simon, and he drew hardly anything out of that business, according to the article. Doing that good, he then finds himself being criticised for trying and failing reasonably, which is something I think we should all be able to do, and especially if we've got a social impact as our reason for being, be celebrated in that. Simon also has a very successful business that you may be aware of called Who Gives a Crap, which is a toilet paper business. And it gives 50% of its profits away to WaterAid, and by all accounts is making profit and has donated a fair amount to WaterAid. But quite a different model, and one must sort of ask themselves the question, has Simon learnt from his Shebeen experience? And I think he would say that he has, because he is, in some of the media reports, and I have spoken to him directly about this, he says that, well, I wouldn't get into a difficult business like a bar again. If I'm going to cause impact, I'm going to do something that is more direct and easier to control. Down the bottom here, the Good Beer Company from Queensland has a beer called the Great Barrier Beer. They give 50% of their profits away to the Australian Marine Conservation Society. And by all accounts, they are selling beer and making donations. Finally, we have Thank You Group, who's also in this group of social enterprises as a terms of a business that makes something that isn't necessarily a social product, but is for a social cause, and they make a few things now. They started with water, and they're pretty well publicised, so you may be aware of them. They've now done soap, cosmetic soap stuff, if you like, and they've recently branched out into nappies, and they give 100% of their profits to charity. So they are, if you like, a not-for-profit, for-profit entity. I think it's wholly owned by a foundation. One of the problems with this model is that if you do give all of your profit away, then you effectively, even if you're a for-profit business, you effectively become a not-for-profit, which means that you're giving away the opportunity to take investment, because no one's going to invest in a company that doesn't give a return necessarily. So Thank You Group's an example of that. They wanted to expand to New Zealand. They'd tried a few markets. They wanted to expand to New Zealand. I don't think they could get investment because they give 100% of their profits away. So instead of that, they got very innovative, and they ran a crowdfunding campaign where he wrote a book. Amazing promoter, Daniel Flint. So those are some examples of social enterprise, and there are 2 different ways of approaching it. Either you create a product that is for impact, or you create a product that's just a normal everyday product, and then you use that product or the profits from that product to pursue your particular cause. And here we are sort of halfway into the session, I believe. And I thought I would leave some final thoughts. That's it's obviously one of Jane Goodall's friends, so she made a good social impact. And this is where we come from, apparently. So what do you do when you're balancing that idea when you're a small business? So you've got a whole lot of information that I've just given you in this class. You've got some options about being a not-for-profit or a for-profit. We can't cover anything in too much detail because we've only got half an hour to an hour. And you're starting an impact business. Well, my advice to you is very simple. Think about the impact you're going to make. What do you need to achieve that? If you need to get donations, if you need to take if there's a grant that requires you to be a not-for-profit entity in order to achieve it, then there's a good reason for becoming a not-for-profit. If you're thinking about taking investment down the track, then you can't be a not-for-profit. You have to be a for-profit entity to be able to give some of your company away. Now, I should say that although those new entities on the board were all from other countries, there is a Prime Minister's business community group that is working on a hybrid model. The B Lab, which is the B Corp from the US, is lobbying government for a social enterprise model. So there may be a different model in the future at some stage. But at this stage, you're either a for-profit or you're not for profit. The great thing about simple proprietary limited companies is that you can make them almost whatever you want. So if you started with a proprietary limited company as your basis, it's simple, it's not very expensive to set up, you can turn it into effectively a not-for-profit if you want to, or you can add a not-for-profit arm later. So I suppose my message to you about what to do when you're weighing these things up is if you have a really good reason to be a not-for-profit, then by all means become one. And sometimes not-for-profits, I think the issue that often people get hung up about is that we have to be something that takes donations to be a not-for-profit. Sometimes a not-for-profit, like I said earlier, is a really good model for just looking after some infrastructure and allowing a group of people to use that infrastructure and reinvest in itself. So creating, if you like, a level playing field. Now, an example of that from my experience is when I was a very junior lawyer, I worked in the UK, just outside of Oxford, for a company called Nominet UK, which was the domain name provider for the UK. Now in those days, domain names were being handed out to academics in different regions. So the country code, like the .au, was given to someone down here and it became Melbourne IT. The .uk code was given to a guy called Dr. Willie Black from Oxford. And he decided to set up a not-for-profit to look after that domain name code. So he set up a not-for-profit, company limited by guarantee, and employed some people to look after it, and then invited all the internet service providers who would be interested in registering domain names on behalf of their customers to become members of that not-for-profit. It became rich very, very quickly. They dropped the price for registering domain names to about $5. They went from 5 employees to about 120 within 3 weeks. And I remember feeling very flashed because I had a Sony Vaio in those days that had a Wi-Fi dongle in the side of it, and I could walk around the building because they had a Wi-Fi area on the roof, and no one had Wi-Fi in those days. So not-for-profits can be really profitable, and they can serve a really good purpose. So if there's a good reason for it, then do it. If you're not sure anyway, or if you think you might change your mind in the future, then don't do that. Go straight into a little for-profit limited company and think about it later. You can either change that into a social enterprise or you can set up your not-for-profit a little bit down the track. I'll leave you with the young lady who thinks you're all great for actually thinking about whether you should be a for-profit or not-for-profit. So thank you very much.